They told you marriage was a destination, the reward, the crown jewel of a life well lived. But they never told you what happens when the ceremony ends and the masks stay on. They never warned you that a marriage without growth is not a sanctuary. It's a sentence, a gilded cage where two souls slowly suffocate beneath the weight of their own unspoken truths. Because without growth, marriage becomes a mausoleum, a place where dreams go to die, where authenticity is buried beneath routine, where the sacred dance of two evolving beings devolves into a stagnant performance. Carl Jung once said, "A marriage is more likely to succeed if the woman follows her own star and remains conscious of her wholeness than if she constantly concerns herself with her husband's star and his wholeness." But what happens when neither partner follows their star? When both abandon their inner callings to maintain the illusion of unity, they become inmates in an emotional prison of their own making, locked in by fear, by obligation, by the haunting question, is this all there is? Friedrich Nietzsche observed, it is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages. And friendship requires growth. It demands curiosity. It thrives on the ever-unfolding layers of the self. Without it, marriage becomes a contract of convenience, a silent agreement to stop evolving. But you were not meant to stop. You were not meant to shrink to fit someone else's expectations. You were not meant to trade your becoming for belonging. Because true marriage is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of a deeper one. A sacred union where two individuals commit to witnessing each other's evolution, to holding space for transformation, to challenging and inspiring one another to reach higher, dig deeper, and love more fully. Without growth, love becomes control. Intimacy becomes obligation. And the home you build together becomes a prison cell. So ask yourself, are you growing together? Or are you just growing apart in silence? Are you nurturing each other's dreams? Or are you silently resenting the parts of yourself you've had to abandon? Marriage without growth is just emotional prison. But marriage with growth, it's liberation. It's the daily choice to love not just who your partner is, but who they are becoming. And to allow yourself the same grace. Because when two people commit to growing together, they don't just build a life, they build a legacy, a testament to the power of love that evolves, expands, and endures. Not because it has to, but because it chooses to. Every single day. Not through duty, not through fear, but through conscious devotion to the unfolding of the soul, both yours and theirs. Because when growth is absent, love becomes mechanical. The touch loses depth. The eyes no longer search. The words become scripts rehearsed for survival. You learn how to coexist, but forget how to connect. And beneath the polished surface of stability, a quiet grief begins to bloom. The grief of a life half-lived, of a love that forgot how to breathe, of a self that slowly disappeared beneath layers of compromise and routine. And then one day, you realize you're not held, you're trapped. Trapped in a ritual that no longer reflects who you are. Trapped in a dynamic where authenticity is punished and silence is rewarded. Trapped in a home that echoes with the absence of wonder. Because you stopped asking questions. You stopped being curious about each other's pain, each other's joy, each other's shadows and light. And in that stopping, the marriage didn't just stall, it began to die. But death, in the Jungian sense, is not the end. It's the invitation, an initiation into transformation. If you have the courage to face it, because real marriage, the kind that becomes an alchemical bond between two evolving souls, doesn't fear the death of old versions. It requires them. It knows that love must shed its skin to remain alive. That desire must be stoked by truth. That intimacy must be fed by growth. That safety must include the freedom to change. Not just permission to grow, but encouragement. Not just space to evolve, but celebration of it. Anything less is imprisonment with a ring. But when both souls rise, when both choose to evolve rather than endure, marriage becomes a temple, a place where healing happens, where shadows are welcomed, where light is shared, where love is not a possession, but a practice of presence, of truth, of growth, every single day. Because when love becomes a practice instead of a possession, it breathes, it adapts, it humbles itself, it bows to truth rather than control. And that's the kind of love Jung spoke of when he said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Marriage without inner awakening is performance. But marriage that begins with the self and expands outward in truth, that is rebirth. Because what makes marriage sacred is not the ceremony, not the vows, not the structure society demands. It's the integrity between two people willing to see one another as they truly are and still say, I will not imprison you in who you were. I will love who you are becoming. End of chapter. That's not a fantasy. That's a fierce and holy discipline. It's the refusal to let comfort breed complacency. It's two people meeting each other again and again, not in yesterday's identity, but in today's truth. When you grow and your partner grows, the space between you becomes alive. It becomes a bridge, not a battlefield. You no longer cling from fear. You connect from freedom. You no longer demand loyalty in exchange for stillness. You inspire loyalty through your aliveness. That kind of union doesn't ask for sacrifice of the soul. It demands the soul. It thrives only where honesty can breathe, where change is not just tolerated but required. Because a marriage that doesn't grow isn't standing still. It's dissolving quietly beneath layers of pretense and passive resignation. And before you know it, you're strangers in the same bed. Ghosts in a home built on yesterday. Actors in a play that no longer fits the story your soul is aching to write. But it doesn't have to be that way. Not if you're willing to wake up. Not if you're willing to speak the truth even if it shakes. Not if you're willing to tear down what's safe to build what's real. Because real love doesn't fear evolution. It requires it. It requires confrontation of the self, of the shadow, of the silent resentments that build brick by brick between two people until they can no longer feel each other through the wall. It requires the death of comfort, the death of ego, the death of the fantasy that love means never being challenged. Because love that never challenges you will never change you. And love that never changes you will bury you in numbness, in routine, in the soft decay of good enough. But your soul wasn't born for good enough. It was born for fullness, for the kind of marriage that becomes a sacred fire, one that doesn't just warm, but refines, that burns away pretense, that purifies the bond through truth, not through roles. And yes, it's uncomfortable to grow beside someone, to see them change, to feel yourself change, and not grip tighter, but to open wider. It takes immense courage to say, I no longer know who you are becoming, but I want to meet them. I want to meet you again. Not once, not yearly, but daily, every conversation, every conflict, every silence that could become a wall or a window. And that is the kind of marriage most never dare to build, because it means risking it all. The image, the stability, the neat little story. But in that risk lies the only path to real intimacy, because love that fears change can never truly see. And what isn't seen isn't loved. Not really. You weren't created to spend your life unseen, and neither was the one you married. So burn the fantasy. Let the illusion die, and ask the only question that matters. Are we still growing? Are we still meeting each other in truth? Or are we just playing roles in a prison that looks like a home? Because the truth is, marriage can be the most liberating spiritual container you'll ever step into. But only if both people are brave enough to evolve together. Together doesn't mean unchanged. Together doesn't mean identical paths or perfectly aligned paces. Together means you witness one another's metamorphosis with reverence instead of resistance. It means you hold space, not possession. You choose presence over performance. You allow the sacred tension between familiarity and mystery to keep the relationship alive not in fear, but in awe. Because no matter how long you've loved someone, you've never fully known them. Not if they're growing. Not if you're growing. And that is not a threat. That is the invitation to fall in love again, not with the memory of who they were, but with the emergence of who they're becoming. To let go of the comfort of the known and step into the sacred unknown together. When you both choose that, you don't just stay married, you stay in love. And that love, it's not built on endurance. It's built on evolution, on the courageous decision to keep looking each other in the eye and asking, who are you today? What hurts? What excites you now? What part of yourself are you afraid to show me? And then listening, really listening, without defense, without agenda, without needing them to stay who they were for your comfort. That's when the prison begins to dissolve. That's when the bars melt into bridges. That's when the silence turns back into song. Because when love stops growing, it starts grieving. And if you felt that grief, that quiet sorrow of being next to someone yet miles apart, don't ignore it. Don't numb it. Don't shame it. Name it. Because the moment you name it, you reclaim your power. And you open the door not just to healing, but to rebirth of yourself, of them, of the sacred union you were always meant to build. And that sacred union, it does not emerge through pretending. It does not bloom from silence. It is not held together by outdated vows that suffocate rather than sanctify. It comes alive only when truth is allowed to speak, even when the truth is messy, even when it hurts, even when it risks the comfort of the old for the fire of the real. Because that's what love is, not comfort, but clarity. Not security through stagnation, but security through authenticity. And real love, the kind that frees you while binding you, deperit, only flourishes in the presence of growth. Not just external achievements, but soul-deep expansion. A marriage that thrives is one where the question is not, how do we avoid falling apart? But how do we keep becoming, even if it changes everything? That's what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. You don't fuse into one another and call it closeness. You rise into yourselves and call it union. Two whole beings, side by side, not shackled, but witnessed, not imprisoned, but inspired. And that requires courage, because the easy path, the path of endurance, of pretending, of sacrificing truth for appearances, will always be there, but so will the quiet death that comes with it. the death of intimacy, the death of self-respect, the death of aliveness. So you must choose every day, every conversation, every silence that could either become a wall or a doorway. You must choose to grow together or apart, but always upward. Because marriage without growth isn't stillness. It's slow erosion. And you were not meant to erode in love. You were meant to expand. And if your marriage is not a container that holds that expansion, then it is not love. It is fear, dressed in ceremony. But if you both dare to evolve, if you both dare to meet the new versions of each other again and again, then you don't just survive marriage. You transcend in it. And that transcendence, it doesn't look like perfection. It looks like presence. It looks like late night conversations that strip away everything performative. It looks like the raw honesty of saying, I don't know who I'm becoming, but I want you to know them too. It looks like the willingness to sit in the discomfort of growth, to hold space for transformation that may not benefit the ego, but will elevate the soul. It means grieving the version of your relationship that can no longer carry your evolution, and celebrating the birth of something far more real. It's not about going back to how things used to be. It's about creating something new, something true, something earned through the fire of becoming. That's why so many relationships die quietly, not from betrayal, not from infidelity, but from the quiet decision to stop becoming, to freeze in time, to call it love, to endure what was never meant to be permanent. But marriage was never meant to be a museum. It was always meant to be alive. It was never about staying the same. It was always about holding each other through the chaos of change, because love is not found in never changing. It is forged in the choice to change together. And when you rise into your own growth, when you reclaim your inner fire, when you look into your partner's eyes, not with expectation, but with invitation, that's when the prison breaks. That's when the walls fall. That's when the rows dissolve and two souls meet again, not as who they were forced to be, but as who they were always becoming. And that is not just marriage. That is a sacred revolution. A revolution not written in grand gestures, but in the daily defiant act of showing up with truth, with presence, with reverence for the mystery unfolding between two ever-evolving souls. Because to love someone deeply is not to possess them. It is to witness them, to sit in the storm of their transformation without flinching, to choose curiosity over comfort, to ask, who are you today? And mean it, not because the old version wasn't enough, but because we were never meant to be static. You see, the prison isn't made of wall. It's made of rows, of stories we were told about what marriage should look like, who we should become to be worthy of staying loved. But those stories were written in fear, and you were never meant to live someone else's script. You were meant to write your own with a partner who is not a captor, but a co-creator. A partner who doesn't ask you to dim your light, but who shields the flame while you grow it. A partner who doesn't punish your change, but who rises with it. Because anything else isn't love. It's a ceasefire, a negotiation, a beautifully decorated emotional war zone. And eventually, the silence becomes unbearable. The mask becomes heavy. The longing for truth becomes louder than the need to keep the peace. So you either break the cycle or you break yourself. But when you choose growth, real growth, you don't just change the marriage. You change everything. You break the generational echo of silence. You redefine what intimacy really means. You raise the standard for every soul who dares to love after you. And you show the world that marriage, when built on evolution, not endurance, is not a prison. It's ascension not into perfection, but into presence, into the real, raw, sacred territory of becoming, where love is not a reward for compliance, but a reflection of your courage to evolve, where partnership doesn't suppress your transformation. It requires it. And when two people commit to that level of truth, that level of fire, that level of soul integrity, they don't just stay together. They rise together through every death and rebirth, through every uncomfortable mirror, through every honest, trembling conversation that begins with, "I'm not the same, and I hope you still want to know me." That's not weakness. That is the most powerful intimacy on earth. Because in that space, you're not performing. You're not pleasing. You're not playing a role. You are present, fully, fiercely, freely, and the relationship becomes a living thing. A sacred space where growth is not feared, but celebrated, where change is not a threat, but an offering, where each version of you that rises is met with reverence, not resistance. And the love that grows in that soil, it is unshakable, because it wasn't built on control. It was built on clarity. It wasn't rooted in fear. It was birthed through freedom. And you look back one day, not at a marriage that survived, but at a union that ascended, not despite the growth, but because of it. Because that is what true sacred union is. Not endurance disguised as love, but expansion born of truth. Not a fortress where both partners hide, but a fire they feed together. A fire that burns away illusion, burns away comfort, burns away the lie that says, love must look one way to be real. No, real love is fluid. It adapts. It asks again and again, who are you becoming, and how can I meet you there? It does not fear the unknown, it invites it. It does not grip tighter as you grow, it makes room. It understands that freedom is not a threat to connection. It is the foundation of it. Because when you are free to evolve, when your soul is not shackled by the illusion of permanence, then what remains is not forced closeness, but chosen presence. And that is the only love worth building your life around. So burn the myth of stability at all costs. Burn the fairy tale that says change is failure. Burn the prison made of politeness, passivity, and pretense. And Standra, awake, alive, in the wild, holy space of becoming, where love is not a role you play, but a soul you meet again and again and again. And if your partner can walk that path with you, if they too are willing to shed who they were, to honor who they're becoming, then you are not married in name only. You are united in purpose, bound not by fear, but by evolution. That is not emotional imprisonment. That is transcendence. That is the divine work of two souls becoming together forever. So if you've been waiting for permission to outgrow what no longer reflects you, to speak what's been silenced, to shed the skin of a marriage that no longer breathes, let this be it. Let this be the moment where endurance gives way to awakening. Let this be the moment where you no longer call suffering sacred, where you stop shrinking for the sake of peace, where you choose truth even when it shakes the ground beneath you. Because you were not born to survive love. You were born to expand inside it, to evolve, to awaken, to rise beside someone who is not threatened by your becoming, but ignited by it. And if they cannot rise with you, then let them watch you fly. Because a marriage without growth is not love. It is slow erosion. It is a contract of fear. But when you choose growth, when you build love on the fire of transformation, you don't just escape the prison, you become the key. And you unlock a love the world rarely sees. A love not built on what's easy, but on what's eternal.